All right, let's dive into the Rugby League World Cup. Looks like you're going to be the RLWC expert.
Haha, that's the plan.
Even if you're not a diehard rugby fan yet, no worries. By the end of this, you will be. I gotta say, flipping through this stuff, this tournament's got a really cool history.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it predates the Rugby Union World Cup. Did you know that?
Yeah, that's one of the most fascinating things about it.
It's a real underdog story. But to really understand it, the scrums, the tries, the rivalries, I think we need some expert help.
Well, I'm happy to try. What's really interesting is the ambition of the RLWC, always aiming for that global recognition, even though it had pretty humble beginnings.
Okay, so let's rewind. 1954, France, picture it, 4 teams. Australia, Great Britain, France, and New Zealand. The OGs, right? It's got this gentleman's agreement vibe, doesn't it? Like a group of mates just decided, hey, let's have a World Cup.
Yeah, kind of. But one key thing to remember, rugby league was already professional back then, unlike rugby union. So they could actually put on a proper international event, like way before rugby union had their World Cup.
30 years before.
Yeah.
That's a crazy head start. So 1954, France hosts, Great Britain wins. But what I love is it was a French guy, Paul Barriere, who really made it happen.
It's interesting.
It wasn't just like the usual suspects. The French Rugby League was a driving force. Is that surprising, or is that just the vibe back then?
It really shows the passion for the sport, beyond just those traditional powerhouses. Even though Great Britain won, the real win was the tournament itself.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was a success financially and with the fans. It proved rugby league could be a global thing, which for a first outing is pretty huge.
Absolutely. But as with anything that's kind of new, there were some growing pains, right? Like the 60s through the 80s, it feels like a lot of experimentation, expansion, and I'm guessing some organizational headaches.
Totally. You see them messing with different formats, like they introduced the round robin in 1960.
Yeah.
Then, in 75, it goes international, hosted across a few countries. Ambitious, sure, but logistically, I bet it was a nightmare.
Oh, for sure. And then there's that multi-year format from 85 to 88. Can you imagine? Waiting that long to find out who wins?
I know.
Nail-biting. But amidst all that, we see Papua New Guinea rising up as a real force. That shows the sport's reach is growing, right?
Oh, absolutely. And think about what it meant for Papua New Guinea to be on that stage. Rugby league can transcend borders, it unites people.
Okay, so we have this underdog tournament finding its groove, then boom, the 90s hit, things get serious. Professionalism, big expansion, it's like the RLWC leveled up. What do you think were the big changes then that made it what it is today?
Well, first off, they expanded to 10 teams in 95 and then 16 teams by 2000. We're talking Russia, Lebanon, Fiji. It was becoming truly global. But the biggest change, I think, was going fully professional in 95.
Yeah, that makes sense. Like they flipped the switch. We're not playing around anymore. Instant credibility boost. What about on the field? Did that change the gameplay much?
Big time. Skills got way better, more tactics, athleticism. It wasn't just about being tough anymore. It was strategic and, well, just more exciting to watch.
Right. And with that comes sponsors, media, bigger audience.
Exactly.
So we have growth, professionalism, that global feel. By 2013, they were breaking attendance records, TV records. The world was watching. But then it gets even more interesting. The Pacific Island nations, they just explode onto the scene. It's not just participation, it's domination.
Right.
Tonga beats New Zealand in 2017. That was huge. Samoa makes the final in 2021. Huge power shift. Did that catch people off guard?
It surprised a lot of people, for sure. But for those following rugby league in the Pacific Islands, it wasn't that shocking. They've got so much passion for the sport. They've been investing in development, coaching.
So it's not luck. It's planned. I love that. And it totally changes the whole story of the tournament. It's not just the big 3 anymore. Australia, England, New Zealand. It's anyone's game now. Yeah. That's got to be good for the sport, right?
Yeah, 100%. The Pacific Islands brought this new energy, new excitement. It's pushed the top teams to get even better. It's a much more level playing field now.
Okay, so we've got this awesome story, growth, global expansion, underdog wins. But let's be real, there have to be some bumps in the road. What are some of the challenges the RLWC has faced, throughout its history?
One of the biggest is still awareness. Outside those core rugby league countries, Australia, England, New Zealand, and the Pacific Islands, it struggles to reach people.
Yeah, it's not as big as, say, football or even rugby union. So building that fan base, getting more people watching, that's a big one. And I imagine funding has to be a factor, right? especially for those smaller nations trying to compete.
Totally. The Rugby League International Federation, the IRL, they just don't have the same kind of money as some of those bigger sports organizations.
So it's like a David versus Goliath situation, but with more scrums and tries.
Exactly.
Oh, and scheduling. I bet that's a nightmare. You have the World Cup, but then players are in their big leagues, the NRL, the Super League.
It's a juggling act for sure. A lot of the best players, their focus is on their clubs, so it's hard for national teams to prep properly for the World Cup.
Wow. Okay, so we've covered a lot here. Humble beginnings in France, Pacific Island dominance, and those challenges of becoming truly global. What a ride. It makes me even more curious about what's next.
Yeah, the RLWC is at a crossroads. The choices they make now will shape the sport's future.
Okay, listener, we're going to take a quick break. When we come back, we'll be tackling the future of the Rugby League World Cup. What are the possibilities? Can it become one of the biggest sporting events in the world? Stick with us. All right, we're back, ready to get optimistic. Let's imagine the future of the Rugby League World Cup. Say, the IRL gets everything they want. What would truly top-tier global RLWC look like?
Okay. Fast forward to, say, 2030. The World Cup is being held in, how about Brazil?
Wow.
24 teams. You've got your powerhouses, but also new teams from everywhere. South America, Africa, maybe even North America making a run.
Brazil, that's amazing. It just feels like instantly global event. Right.
And with all that investment we talked about, those developing rugby nations, the competition's got to be wild.
Oh, yeah. Imagine the Pacific Island teams. Still strong, but now they've got rivals coming up. Every single match is a nail-biter. Anyone could win.
Okay, so the action is intense, but what about the fans? I'm picturing those Brazilian stadiums packed. People from all over the world, the energy.
It'd be insane. A sea of jerseys, flags everywhere, and with the right TV deals, millions watching globally. Not just rugby fans either. Primetime stuff. Must-see TV.
I can hear the crowd already, but it can't be just that 1 month, right? The tournament's over, then what?
This is where it gets interesting. Think about kids in Brazil, seeing their team picking up a rugby ball for the first time. The sport grows in places you'd never expect. A whole new generation of players, fans.
It's like planting seeds everywhere. The RLWC kicks it all off. That's powerful.
And as the RLWC makes money, they can put that back into development programs. More success, more investment, it just keeps growing. Okay, I love the optimism. But you're too smart to think there aren't challenges, right? The RLWC goes for global domination. What gets in the way?
Well, you got to balance expansion with competition. More teams is good, but the quality has to stay high. Nobody wants to watch blowouts.
Right, it needs to be unpredictable. Any team could win. That's what makes it fun. So how do you do that?
Tough question. They need to be smart about who qualifies, make sure new teams get resources to improve, maybe even different levels of competition. You want everyone involved, but it still needs to be, a real contest.
And scheduling. I bet that's still a nightmare, isn't it? Fitting a World Cup around all the other leagues, the NRL, the Super League.
It'll take the IRL and those leagues working together way more than now. Maybe more flexible scheduling, time set aside just for international games, or maybe we just rethink how club and country rugby work together.
And we can't forget how people watch. That changes all the time. Streaming, social media, all that. The RLWC has to keep up, right?
They got to be smart about it. Partnerships with streaming sites, cool stuff on social media, maybe even ways to make watching more interactive. You can't just show the games. You got to build excitement around it, make it an event.
So adaptable, creative, use all the new tech. It sounds like there's real excitement, but also you're being realistic about what they're up against.
Yeah, exactly. And there's one more thing about the future that I find really exciting. We've talked about geography, right? But what if there was a Women's Rugby League World Cup? Just as big as the men's.
Now that's an idea. Women's Rugby League is getting huge. They deserve that platform.
Right. Think of the young girls watching, seeing their heroes. It would change the sport, make it truly inclusive.
Sends a message, Rugby League isn't just for men. It's for anyone who loves the sport.
And think about the tournament itself. Double the excitement, double the stories, a whole other level of competition.
Wow, this is getting me pumped up. From Brazil to a Women's World Cup, the possibilities are amazing.
It really makes you think, where could this go? But let's bring it back down to earth for a sec. Let's recap what we've learned about the RLWC's future.
So, listener, we've got a global tournament, incredible matches, packed stadiums, and this idea that it can inspire people all over the world. Pretty exciting stuff.
And we can't forget those challenges, keeping the competition fair, figuring out scheduling and media, and making sure this growth is sustainable financially.
But even with all that, it feels like there's so much potential. The RLWCs has come so far, they seem ready to take on anything. Before we wrap up, though, we've got to leave you with something to think about.
We want you to consider your own role in this. Think about it. How can you shape the future of rugby league?
That's a big one, isn't it? Easy to get caught up in the hype, but the real stuff happens when people get involved, on the ground.
Exactly. Think about it. Every time you watch a match, share an article, get someone else into the sport, you're helping it grow.
We're all on the same team here, building something special. It's bigger than just cheering for your team. It's understanding the impact the RLWC can have.
We've seen how rugby league changes things, empowers people, builds understanding between cultures, creates opportunities. Look at the Pacific Islands.
Yeah.
They didn't just raise the bar on the field, they inspired a whole generation back home, gave their community something to be proud of.
The RLWC is about way more than who wins, right? It's about that lasting legacy.
And that's something everyone can be a part of. Doesn't matter if you're a hardcore fan or just curious. It's about celebrating that spirit, the competition, how sport can bring people together.
Okay, before we wrap this up, I'm going to hit you with one last question. It's a what if, but it shows just how big this could get.
All right, lay on me.
What if, and stick with me here, the Rugby League World Cup became as massive as the FIFA World Cup? Everyone's watching the passion, the impact. What would that world even look like?
Yeah.
What kind of legacy would it leave? Would rugby league be everywhere? New athletes, new fans? Would it break down barriers, bring people closer?
Those are the right questions to ask. The future isn't set in stone, it's still being written. We all have a role to play. So as you keep digging into the RLWC, think about that.
What's your part in this? Big or small, how do you shape the future of this amazing sport? Support your local team. Spread the word. Talk about it. Embrace that rugby spirit.
It's been great diving into this with you. Hope you got some good insights. Maybe even spark some curiosity to learn more.
And who knows? Maybe one day we'll revisit this. See how the RLWC achieved all those big dreams, became that global phenomenon.
Until then, keep those minds curious and keep exploring.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into the Rugby League World Cup.